I grew up outside of Morgantown, West Virginia, along a creek with rhododendron bushes, and my mom describes putting me in that creek as a baby and me being like, because it was like this rushing mountain creek. And I think when I was in elementary school, 8, 9 years old, the creek turned bright orange. Bright orange. Upstream from a mine, the acid runoff had turned our beautiful little creek bright orange. So I think from an early age, I was aware of the vulnerabilities in Appalachia.
In the beautiful Holy Land of Appalachia, like many other remote areas of our world, the need to protect and take care of creation is often overshadowed by a need for economic development. Yet we also have poverty, a struggle to just get by. These are the places where theology is lived, where God is most present.
We were rich in timber, we were rich in coal, we were rich in natural gas, we were rich in class. And yet, despite that, we had this contradiction of such a high percentage of poor people. That was the genesis of the Catholic Committee of Appalachia.
I was really drawn to this idea that, you look at the scripture, you look at Jesus and the prophets, God is with the poor. The People's Pastoral really gives priority to the lived realities and the faith of people who are trying to walk and struggle in their day-to-day lives.
Not just the authority of bishops, not just the authority of the Pope, but perhaps even more, is to listen to those places where God is most present.
Well, it's all about coming together as a community of hope.
We did not want theology out of a textbook. We did not want theology out of, a college classroom. We wanted theology that was lived and walked and breathed in these hollows and these mountaintops.
Like many good ideas, this all began as notes written on a napkin in a bar. As members of the Commission on Religion in Appalachia wanted to form a new group that would bring the voices of those in the margins, those in Appalachia, to the Catholic Church and beyond.
The first pastoral letter, This Land is Home to Me, it was done in a very different way than any other pastoral letter had been done previous. These were done in such that they started by listening to the people on the ground, the people living in Appalachia.
Somebody had the idea of, instead of our going to the bishops with this, which would be just an idea, why don't we put a team of people into the field to do listening projects? These would be listening sessions where you convene maybe 10, 12 people, ordinary people, and ask them, what is life like for you? What does the church and the gospel have to say? These listening sessions were hugely successful.
That pastoral letter is the most unbelievable pastoral letter I think that the American bishops have ever written. I mean, it just showed where people were, where the church was then.
In fact, where the idea of the Appalachian Pastoral, the first one, This Land is Home to Me, came out of 4 or 5 of them sitting around a bar and having a beer, and it came up, well, we need to have the bishops speak out what Vatican II is saying, that it's not a clerical church. It's we're all in this together, walking together. See, up to this point, the church, the image of the church that most people had was this fortress on the hill. There was a total 180-degree shift where the bishops at Second Vatican Council said, wait a moment, what the church is the vehicle, the foremost vehicle of God's loving humanity and all creation. And how that happens is not a fortress on a hill, but is rather two or three coming together. And Jesus promised, and there I am in the midst.
In a bar, around some drinks, after a quorum meeting, they were talking about how important the work had been and how important the voices of the people, lifting up the voices of the people, and how this was church to them. This was church at the ground. This was grassroots church. And they saw the importance of it and knew that the bishops needed to be saying this too. The bishops should be lifting up the voice of the people of Appalachia. And a pastoral letter would be just the thing to do it.
It's not so much about the theology of the church, but it's theology of what life is about here on this earth with these people.
It was also during the increasing awareness of the abuse in the church. A lot of women that were working in parishes were losing their roles. I mean, there was just a lot of conflict at that time. And I think it was a deflection around the sexual abuse. But I started to realize that CCA was in danger. That's when I realized it would probably be good if I stepped off and let somebody else. And I thought the perfect person would be John Roush. Father John Roush. He had been involved in the mountains and mountaintop removal for a long time. So he brought a really strong perspective of the region, but he also had an economic background as well.
We come today in the midst of God's creation to give praise to God, but then also to understand that we have to earn our livelihood. But we can earn our livelihood with a spirit of sustainability, with a spirit of being gardeners, with a spirit of being real stewards in the midst of what God has given us.
What he did to me was to bring all of creation together. We're all part of the same earth. We're all part of the same creator.
God put humanity in the garden to care and cultivate it. That's Genesis 2:15. All of us are to be co-gardeners with God. We are supposed to be stewards. We talk about the common good. The common good is not just for my gain, it is for the entire community. And the community extends to the next generations. Not just simply, we'll use everything up this generation. We've got to look out for subsequent generations. That's the kind of issue that is at stake when it comes to a theological reflection on care of creation. We are to be people who look after things intentionally and make sure that we are part of the solution and not part of the problem.
As CCA struggled to find common ground with Appalachian bishops, we realized that the teaching authority of the church should come from the people, and therefore did not need the endorsement of bishops. Voices that are concerned for the earth and the voices of communities in poverty were coming from outside the church's official power structure. This paradigm of authority, this new view of who the church really is, shifted completely. This led to a truly revolutionary pastoral letter, the People's Pastoral.
The other pastoral letters were hearing the voice of the poor, but it was also from a position of authority. In some ways, the People's Pastoral is not just about the authority of the people, but the voice of the poor. And the idea of a preferential option for the poor, and the idea that we find Christ in the poor.
St. Oscar Romero gives a great definition of what does it mean to be poor. The poor are those who are close to death. Okay, so anybody who cannot take life for granted, anybody who has been a victim or a survivor of social oppression. So when we say we want to be a church of the poor, we have to be a church of those who are close to death. And so if we believe that God is present to those populations in a special way, those people have a teaching authority.
When when I learned about the Catholic Committee on Appalachia being responsible for those documents in the first place, and working on the third document, which was the People's Pastoral Letter, I was more than ever eager to be involved. When they presented me the draft of the People's Pastoral, and I was excited because I knew it should have been a year for another pastoral letter about Appalachia if they were done in 20-year increments, and was really pleased that they had taken so much of the theology of Pope Francis and his concern for the earth, as well as his concern for the poor, and his gift for listening.
You know, it was really exciting because there were all kinds of people who were lending their voices to it, but it was in an effort to try to include the particularities of those voices. Listen to, the voices of communities that are economically vulnerable and that are experiencing addiction and high rates of imprisonment, and which is really what kind of ties it in a lot of ways back to those early pastoral letters, is the idea of prophetic voice arises from outside of official power.
And when we were putting the People's Pastoral together, a big conversation was we need to be more attentive to voices that have not been addressed in our previous pastorals.
Michael played an instrumental role in the actual writing of the People's Pastoral Letter. Michael was around a lot, and I went to my first CCA gatherings with him, and his music and his faith and his passion for justice were really strong, and he had tremendous gifts of mind and heart and a courageous spirit. It's a great loss, but I think his voice is also there in the pastoral.
And I think a lot of young people from the Appalachian region find themselves asking the question, what does it mean to be connected to Appalachia or live that mission outside of Appalachia?
I totally believe that there is a spiritual hunger out there, not just for Catholics, but a lot of young people. When I talk about young people, I'm talking about people that are in their 20s and 40s that are looking for a spirituality that CCA offers.
But when I'm in CCA, I feel like I am in the church, and I feel like maybe I'm in the church that the first followers of Jesus were trying to bring into the world.
It's about who the church could be if it really embedded itself in the heart and lives of the people of Appalachia.
Pope Francis reminds us that we can't be a teaching church unless we're also a listening church, and they go hand in hand. And I think the pastoral letters from Appalachia are demonstrations of that.
Today, we face new challenges. We have major differences in our politics causing polarization of our citizens, families, and friends. We have a real debate in this country on Christian nationalism, care of creation, racism, discrimination, and inclusivity in our church and communities. It's important now more than ever that we advocate for the people in Appalachia, give voice to those on the margins.
Non-discrimination is a Catholic value, and it's one that we should be living, and our social justice tradition should be the primary lens when we talk about LGBTQ issues, whether in the church or society. The foremost consideration should be, are we being just in how we're approaching these issues? The first thing we need to make sure is people are safe, have housing, have jobs, are protected, are welcomed into their families, ending discrimination, and then we can sort of begin to look at the rest of it more closely. And then within the church, I think we need to have conversations about, are we being inclusive communities? What practices and policies do we need in place to make sure that everyone is treated as an equal and able to not just be welcomed, but be celebrated, as we all should be in the church, and be able to journey with everyone on the difficult path of Christian discipleship.
I love the social justice work, eco-justice, racial justice, all the justice work that it does, and that everyone's prophetic voice is welcome.
we need each other, and so we need to figure out a way of being church that allows people to bring their full selves on that journey together.
I think I heard the phrase a few times today, be the church you wish to see in the world. And something, we were talking about that in one of the discussion groups that I was a part of, and something that came up when we were kind of talking about what that meant was that even though individuals might have like problems with a lot of the time, especially the hierarchy of the church, it's not only their church, it's also my church, it's also our church. The church can look like a lot of different things, and you can choose to some degree what that looks like and the way that you practice your faith and the way that it's expressed in the world.
I think with any organization or initiative, it really has to come from our gifts and what we have to offer. We got to build on those successes, and we got to build on what's working.
Jesus loved all people. We're not perfect. We always fall short of this, but I think each of us are trying to love all people, not just in an emotional, like, oh yeah, I love you, but you're way over there kind of way, but to fully embody that in the world.
I was always told that I never amount to nothing, and that, it's just a way of life to live in the mountains and be poor and accept the way things was, and that we didn't have a say-so in life. I did have a voice, I just didn't know where that voice belonged, and then I heard about Appalachian community, and I started reading about social change, and so I came over and I talked to a couple of people, and I said, God, if you want me here, you'll put me here. I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to put a smile on somebody's face today.
CCA is a place where people build each other back, where you can share stories, where people get where you're coming from, and where the Catholic community can support each other in a way that helps all of our work together under the gospel.
Where do we go from here? I'm sure the leaders of CCA over 50 years ago asked that same question. Who will fight for the rights of the oppressed and give voice to those on the margins? We will stand on the shoulders of the giants before us and take on these modern issues just like before. If we don't, who will? And just like those before us, we will make our voices heard.
That voice of the poor, voice of the people on the margins, not just economically poor, but socially poor. We knew of before, but we weren't listening as closely to. So people of color, indigenous folks, women, CCA has emphasized or amplified those voices that we didn't hear before.
There's no issues that the Gospels don't touch, right? So anything can be of relevance and anything can be an opportunity to learn. And in the past, the church has had glaring blind spots. And so hopefully CCA will continue to help the church lovingly recognize those blind spots and shine a light on them.
For CCA, it means especially Black and Indigenous people in Appalachia being converted by what we're hearing, right? I think very often the church needs to be converted to the poor, to those who are suffering, to those who are oppressed.
The truth is a precondition to justice, and justice is a precondition to healing, and we need so much healing in the world, and there needs to be a lot of truth-telling before that can happen. So I really like CCA's focus on sharing stories, and listening to each other, deep listening, respectful listening.
There's liberation theologians who talk about base communities or communities on the margin being the yeast and ferment of renewal for the wider church. And I believe that it is from marginalized communities that larger change always comes about. It never happens in the center, it always happens on the fringes. And I see in the Catholics involved in this group and the communities that they're with in parts of Appalachia being a space that has been dismissed and marginalized and oppressed, being that ferment and renewal that needs to continue as a witness for the larger Catholic Church.
when you know these people and you know their histories, you know the stories, you've sat and listened to what they've been through, what they did in the early years, and you know what you've done, you want that to be carried on into the future by the next generation. You want that continuity to be a feeling of grounding. It's a sense of grounding. I think that's what's going to move folks forward, is being grounded in our history.